What's up guys, Deroir here. The Living World Season 4 is now just around the corner with the release date set for November 28th. So before that goes live and potentially shakes up everything, I want to bring you all my personal comprehensive review of Guild Wars 2's latest expansion, Path of Fire. This is going to be a bit of a mini-series over the next couple of days where I share my point of view and my honest opinions about the most prominent features and content introduced with Path of Fire. Now, to preface this review a little bit, I consider myself a heavily invested veteran of the game, so just know that some of my opinions on the matter at hand stem from my long-term engagement with the Guild Wars franchise, and so some of the criticism might not at all have any merit to newer players of the franchise, but will perhaps seem much more relevant to long-term invested players. But yeah, I'll do my best to expose my own personal biases if I do end up saying something that might seem outrageous. This series of videos will mostly be spoiler-free. Mostly. Especially when it comes to the actual story of the expansion, which will have its own separate video that you are free to skip and come back to later if you choose to do so. However, for topics such as the maps or certain achievements or whatnot, I might touch on a few minor story threads here and there, but I am not going to spoil the plot of the expansion without first warning you. Luckily for us, Path of Fire brought with it much more than just the story, so we've got quite a few topics to go through. Now, to just give you all a perspective on my accomplishments in Path of Fire, at this point in time, I have done and completed approximately 99% of the content that we got in the expansion. I have gotten every mount and every mastery point available. I've played through the story 3 times and map completed every map several times spread across all of my 9 professions. As of recording this, I have completed all achievements except one, the last of which is just bugged. I have full access to the new guild hall and have played around with the few new things available with it. I have obtained all of the 6 new armor skins and weapon skins. I have, at least peripherally, played every new elite specialization. Of course, I've spent more time on some compared to others, but still. And so, I guess that because of this, I feel very comfortable talking about every aspect of the expansion with you all in this comprehensive, slightly spoilerish review of Guild Wars 2's second expansion, Path of Fire. In extension to the note on my so-called accomplishments, I have also completed all of the content and achievements for the previous expansion, Heart of Thorns, and so I will do my best to draw parallels between the 2 expansions as well, all throughout this review of Path of Fire. As a last note, I want to be clear that all of my thoughts and points of view that I share with you all throughout this series are highly subjective, some more than others of course. We can all have differing opinions on the details and that's fine. I'm not here to dictate any truth, just to share my opinions. So yeah, if you agree or disagree with me on any topic in this series, be sure to tell me your point of view in the comments below so we can talk about and discuss and understand each other. Alright? Alright. With all that in its place, let's get on to it. So to kick off this series, let's start off with the poster child for Path of Fire, and arguably the single biggest feature introduced into the game by a long shot. A feature that shook up the entirety of players' spatial interaction with the environments of the game. I'm of course referring to mounts. Mounts is a feature which, till Path of Fire, I hadn't really expected or even wanted to see in Guild Wars 2, but nonetheless, mounts have turned out to be a feature of the game that I now value as an immensely positive change and a highly appreciated addition to the game. In my experience, the mount system was so well implemented into the game that it genuinely only took a few days for me to get so overly accustomed and addicted to the comfort of having the mounts that I started to wonder how we ever got around without mounts. But see, previous to the introduction of mounts, and the whole reason why I never expected mounts to be a thing, what we had was a scenario in which every single map was littered with waypoints, a teleportation system that makes it super easy for players to travel across the world of Tyria in the blink of an eye. And so, to make the mounts valuable and interesting regardless of this waypoint feature, ArenaNet did 2 very clever things. The first was that they made the 5 new desert maps immensely huge and filled them with a very scarce amount of waypoints. Practically just placing the bare minimum of waypoints at specific strategically important locations so as not to make it annoying still. Secondly, they made mounts fast, versatile, and most importantly, fun. In extension to this, every single mount feels very distinct in its behavior. Every mount has its very specific areas of expertise, which rarely overlap in any major way with other mounts. These mounts aren't just reskins of each other, they're not just a pick and choose scenario on which mount you visually prefer. To get the maximum utility out of your mount use, you want to constantly hot swap between mounts to run, jump, fly, and glide across the immensely diverse environments found in Guild Wars 2. Now, initially when the expansion launched, hot swapping wasn't as smooth as most players wanted it to be, but because of the community response to this dilemma, ArenaNet went in and removed a apparently 2-second forced delay between swapping mounts, which basically made mounts swapping near instantaneous, which feels so nice and smooth. So to accomplish this feeling of versatility between the mounts, ArenaNet introduced 5 mounts, each with very distinct movement strengths. The first one is the Raptor, which is the fastest running mount with the ability to also launch itself forward immense distances, making canyons and broken bridges easily traversable. The Raptor is a great starter mount as it is very versatile on its own. However, it has quite a few problems with minor curvatures in the environment and so fares best on completely flat ground. Also, the Raptor is really bad at jumping up even small ledges. Even just smaller rocks and such, it'll struggle on mostly. The engage skill, however, called Tailspin, is by far, in my opinion, the best and most useful engage skill of all the mounts. With the secondary mastery, it allows you to leap into battle and pull together all adjacent enemies towards you. The third mastery increases the launch ability to jump twice the distance, which just makes the travel distance completely ridiculous. And the fourth mastery shares out the first Raptor mastery to all other mounts. This is called Ravenous Strike and increases the damage dealt when engaging, which can be quite effective but is not exactly a huge necessity to acquire immediately, since ArenaNet didn't want players to substitute their character's actual skills in favor of mounts. These skills are rather non-essential. Therefore, mounts only have the single engage skill, and so an increase in damage won't make or break any fight. However, the crowd control aspect of the skill itself might do just that, but that is not tied to the mastery, so yeah. The second mount, the Skipper, this giant kangaroo bunny thing, is compared to the Raptor not as fast moving on the ground, though still faster than the average player character speed, but what it lacks in speed it makes up for by being able to jump way into the air. As such, the Skipper makes it possible for players to finally climb up mountainsides and reach just about every peak in the game, especially with the third mastery of the Skipper, which allows you to jump even higher, a feature which I've long wanted in the game. Personally, it took me quite a bit of time to actually get fully comfortable using the Skipper and its jumps compared to all the other mounts, since initially the movement of this mount can feel really clunky and weird to aim, but once I got the hang of it, it quickly became invaluable to me. The mastery line for the Skipper, to me, is priceless, especially with the fourth mastery, which shares the first mastery Fortified Descent with all other mounts. This allows all mounts to take reduced fall damage, allowing you to jump off from immense heights without dying or dismounting, regardless of which mount you're using. The second mastery makes it so that the Skipper's engage skill will knock down enemies around it. This skill has great crowd control potential and is probably one of the best engage skills to use on enemies that spawn with break bars, such as the Pinata Choya boss. The third mount, the Skimmer, floats above the ground. As such, it is also able to float over any dangerous surface, be it lava, quicksand, the sulfurous wastelands of the desolation, or just water. This ability opens up for much faster maneuverability in water areas than we've ever seen, which I personally really appreciate, and I know a lot of other players do. All we're missing now is a sea turtle mount to also move fast underwater. That said, the Skimmer is my least utilized mount out of all of them, which in large part is due to its slow speed on any surface that isn't fluid. As great and fast as it is to use on water, just as slow and clunky it is on any other surface. And also, part of the reason why I don't use it that often is probably also due to the fact that I, as a player of Guild Wars 2, where water combat isn't that popular, have kind of been conditioned to more or less just avoid watery areas in this game. The Skimmers Masteries are also arguably the least impactful. Both the first and second mastery enhances the barrel roll engage skill, which in itself deals poor damage, but instead heals players and NPCs if you pass through them. The first mastery adds protection and swiftness to your character on engage, and the second enhances the healing potential by allowing you to revive down players with the barrel roll skill. That, however, can actually be useful if you're joining in on a fight where players are struggling when you arrive, but other than that, it's not really that impactful. And so because of the Skimmer's slightly lacking abilities, I find myself only using it when I really have to. The fourth mount, the Jackal, a creature created by the Jinn of the Elonian Desert from the tormented sands from the ancient days of Abaddon, has the ability to teleport and travel through sand portals with its third mastery. This mount alone is probably my single most used mount, simply because of the immense inherent versatility and maneuverability attached to the ability to teleport. Also, compared to the Raptor's launch ability, the Jackal's teleport skill is much better at handling curvatures in the terrain. As for the Jackal's masteries, the first and fourth mastery arguably has the most impact on every single mount and the safety of players, as the first allows you to actually evade attacks when using the mount abilities, and the fourth shares this out to all mounts. Especially since mounts have such low health pools by default, this mastery makes it so much easier to move through the dangerous desert areas without being knocked off of your mount. The engage skill, Pounce, is on its own rather weak damage wise, but at least it also blinds enemies. However, the second mastery also adds a large AoE barrier to all allies on engage, making it a rather great engage skill for sticky situations. Lastly, the secret hidden mount, the Griffon. This mount is an absolutely crazy addition to the game because it can literally fly anywhere and it can move at an insane speed across an entire map. But regardless of this awesome ability, the mount's movement is limited, somewhat. The max speed of the Griffon requires you to firstly reach a very high point to allow you to use swoop and the third mastery skill called wing flap to actually gain the maximum speed. With the first mastery acquired, this mount can be mounted while in the air, which allows you to transition from glider use to Griffon or just save you from falling to your death. However, this ability is not shared across all the other mounts, which mechanically makes sense, but would have been super cool to have. Speaking of the act of diving with the Griffon is actually the only mount to have a second hidden skill. This is because not only can the Griffon dive, it can also launch itself back to the same height that it dove from by using its hidden second skill, which you only really realize exists when you look through the control options in your settings. Despite its powerful usefulness, the skill is rather badly advertised to the general player base. I personally only realized that the second skill was a thing when I tried to complete any of the Griffon exclusive adventures. It seemed to me like they were completely impossible at first before I started looking through the control options and realized that there was a way to regain height. Mind-blowing. It felt to me as though the team intentionally limited the UI to accommodate for the symmetry of only having one skill on the skill bar for every mount, which is something I don't really agree with necessarily. That minor criticism out of the way, the visual experience of flying across the maps is such an awesome sight, and I truly love having the Griffon. It is by far my favorite mount added to the game. Oh, and also the engage skill Swoop is the most powerful engage skill in terms of damage alone, but other than that, it does nothing extra. However, this engage skill can also be used from the air to aim at and attack foes from the sky, which is super cool to execute. The acquisition of each of these mounts and their masteries are a tad bit different from what we saw with the Heart of Thorns masteries. In Heart of Thorns, most masteries unlocked automatically, but with Path of Fire, each of the mounts are either tied to an event or heart task or a set of collections in the case of the Griffon. On top of that, you're asked to purchase the mounts themselves for gold and the new map currency trade contracts. Only the Raptor is completely free and acquired through the main storyline. The Skimmer and the Skipper costs just 1 gold, the Jackal costs 20 gold, and the Griffon has a total cost of 250 gold spread across a number of collections, which is a price some people have argued heavily against, to which I'd say that the Griffon really is rather optional. However cool and useful it might be, it is not required to complete the main story and should instead perhaps be seen as a cool reward to be earned over time. On top of this price tag, we also have the obligatory experience gain to consider when mastering all the masteries. However, for Path of Fire, we're only looking at a total of about 12.5 million experience points total to max out every single mount, compared to Heart of Thorns, which had a maximum cap at approximately 45 million experience points. The Path of Fire requirements are much more manageable for every player, regardless of their time investment. Now, with my previous knowledge of Masteries from Heart of Thorns, when Path of Fire launched, I was more than ready to grind out millions of experience. I had all the boosters and items ready to increase my experience gain, but it turned out that the story and map progression was extremely well paced, resulting in me barely having to grind any experience whatsoever. I actually ended up getting the presumed max mastery level of 245 before I even realized that there was the secret mastery of the Griffon, which when maxed out adds up to the max mastery level of 257. So all the while I was doing the Griffon collection, I was just wasting the experience I was getting. Now, I have to admit, as well paced and balanced as the experience and the mastery point requirements are for Path of Fire, I did feel just a little bit disappointed. I personally feel like those specific requirements should have a higher bar to reach, since they're really just acquired once. They should at least feel like they're somewhat tough to get. I don't even think that the devs at ArenaNet or even most of the player base agrees with me on that point. But ever since Heart of Thorns, I haven't really felt challenged on that front. What we've seen all throughout the Living World Season 3 and the expansion is that every mastery has been set to a baseline low effort value, and I personally think that's kind of a shame. Now, of course, I do see the positive side of this, in which it creates the scenario where all players, hardcore or even super casual, feel welcome in the game. The barrier to entry of all content isn't locked behind huge walls of experience. But yeah, to me, it just felt a little bit too watered down at this point. As for the future of the mount system, I believe that in the future, especially for the Living World, these mounts will heavily influence the map designs of future maps. Whether that will take the shape of us getting larger maps, more vertical maps, or for them to just have way more obstacles, I don't really know. But one thing is certain to me, we will most definitely be seeing much more detailed and complex map designs, as players will have easier access to all corners of the maps. Now, as a lot of players have seen in any other games where mounts are present, the acquisition of mount skins, either in-game or through the gem store, was an inevitability. For ArenaNet, it took about a month before we saw the first skins come into the game with the Halloween release and its spooky mount skins, and yet another few weeks before a whole lot more dropped into the game. The first batch of skins only changed the texture of the mount skins with a skeleton texture and added a smoky effect. Compared to the original skin, which has a single dye channel, all the new skins have 4 slots, which add quite a bit of variety options for players to customize their mounts, regardless of players having the same skins. Now, admittedly, in this video, I don't really want to go into any further details on the matter of mount skins, but if you do want some of my extended thoughts on the matter, do feel free to check out one of my previous videos on the matter by clicking the link in the description. I'll add a little extra note though. Going forth with the current mount skin system, I for one at least do not want us to ever be able to fully change the race of the mounts. It'd be weird for me to train the Raptor Mastery only for us to be running around with a piglet or a metal goat. I'd much rather just want to see different textures, and perhaps even, if we can consider them outfits introduced to the mounts. I for one would kinda love to see some armor plating on my Griffon. That said though, I won't at all mind if we get different raptor types or all the other mount types. Say perhaps an avian or a feathered raptor or a fractal jackal with solid ocean jade chunks that replaces the stony runes. Stuff like that. More than anything though, I'd love to someday see mount skins added through in-game acquisition. Like the one I just suggested with the fractal jackal from a fractal. I mean, a boy can dream, right? As a last note on the mounts, I and many other people of the community believe heavily that new mounts are very likely, despite these 5 original mounts having covered most of the movement capabilities that we can reasonably expect. I personally think that we'll be seeing a mount mastery progression stretch all the way through the next season of the Living World story. One which, much like the Griffon, will possibly have a larger collection tied to it, and potentially also a reasonably sized bag of money required to max it out. But unlike the Griffon, this will likely be spread out over several episodes and thus several months. Guess we'll see if that one comes true very soon. Alternatively to a new mount, we might just be seeing extended capabilities of the already established mounts. There's already been quite a bit of talk within the community, and some early leaks may have led the way for this, about a mount with the ability to transport other players, which to me sounds extremely cool, but also potentially extremely game-changing. Unless its areas of potential movement become heavily restricted, we might see a future where players can pay other players to map complete for them. Now, I'd actually love to see players be able to earn gold in other ways than just regular farm, and this actually seems like a super cool addition to the possibilities available, but we'll have to see if it even comes to pass. Another alternate mount that we were already told by the developers that they had been working on was a spider mount, which could kind of shoot its way all around the place, but I presume that most of the capabilities of that thing has been transferred over to the Draconis Mons Mastery. One of my personal worries about the introduction of the Mount Masteries is that regardless of how well implemented and impactful mounts are and can be, I sincerely hope that the Heart of Thorns concept for Masteries, the smaller, more specific Masteries, are not forgotten. Heart of Thorns Masteries compared to Path of Fire Masteries are vastly different, where Path of Fire stuck exclusively to the concept of Mount Masteries. Heart of Thorns introduced Masteries which created a sense of minor specialization within specific areas of the game. Now, regardless of these Masteries nowadays being largely ignored by the community due to most of these area specializations becoming baseline, I genuinely believe that these kinds of Masteries should continue to have a place in the game going forth. If not, we're possibly going to see an immense bloat of mounts and mount skills coming into the game, which may sound cool, but it will also act to put more and more pressure on the environment design of every map to accommodate for these super game-breaking animals and all of their abilities. Alternatively, we'll just be seeing progression added to the already existing mounts in the form of more and more masteries. This though, I wouldn't necessarily be totally against, to a point. I'd just rather not see any mount capabilities bloat to a point where they become best in slot for literally everything. On that note, I believe I've gone through most of my major thoughts on the subject, and thus we've come to the end of the first video. In the next video, we'll be talking about the maps that were introduced with Path of Fire and all of the things that were put into them. Overall, and to add a few conclusive thoughts, I cannot wait to see where they take mounts from here on out, both in terms of their skin acquisition, in the bloat of their skills, and if we're ever going to see any new mounts. Some of these questions might be answered just around the corner on November 28th. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the mists.